Josephine was just a young cleaner in the vibrant city of Bellamonte, a dreamer, pure-hearted, and full of hope. Until everything collapsed. Public humiliation, an unexpected pregnancy, and a future that seemed lost. But what seemed like the end was only the beginning. A gesture of kindness from where she least expected it. Augustus Marshall, the eccentric owner of the region's largest chocolate factory, an unlikely marriage, an unexpected will, a colossal inheritance, and a secret no one could imagine. The child Josephine was carrying wasn't his. How did a discredited woman transform into one of Bellamonte's most powerful? Discover now the first part of Factory Owner Leaves Inheritance to Pregnant Cleaner, but it's not his child. Josephine's Dream in Bellamonte. Bellamonte was one of those towns that seemed straight out of an old book. Colorful houses, cobblestone streets, and the sweet aroma that hung in the air, coming from the famous Marshall chocolate factory, the pride and engine of the local economy. Among its shining corridors and constantly moving machines, a figure passed almost unnoticed. She wore a simple apron, her hair carefully tied back, and her eyes full of hope. Josephine, a young cleaner in her early 20s, known for her kindness and quiet demeanor. She worked hard every day, cleaning up the excess of a sugary production, but she dreamed of something much sweeter than chocolate. She dreamed of a better life. Josephine had grown up right there in Bellamonte, raised by her grandmother, a widowed seamstress who taught her simple yet profound values: honesty, hard work, and faith in goodness. Her mother she never knew, her father, unknown. But none of this stopped her from being a smiling, generous young woman, always ready to help. Perhaps that's exactly what made her invisible to some, and fascinating to others. Among those who noticed her was Julian, the nephew of the factory's administrative director. Handsome, polite, full of charm, and with a smile that made Josephine's heart beat faster, even when she tried to hide it. They met for the first time in the company cafeteria. He was lost, looking for where to put his tray. She shyly pointed with a gesture and smiled. He thanked her with a light compliment, one of those that seem forgotten in the moment, but live forever in the memory of someone in love. Over time, they grew closer. He sought her out with furtive glances. She blushed and looked away. They started talking during breaks, laughing at the same things, exchanging confidences amidst the smell of cocoa and vanilla. For Josephine, it was a modern fairy tale. For Julian, it seemed to be just another fleeting adventure. But he never made that clear. On the contrary, he said she was different, special, that no one made him feel as light as she did. And Josephine believed him. Because when you have little, you cling even to what seems like affection. In her free time, she drew dresses in an old notebook, dreamed of opening her own sewing shop, imagined a family, a house with blue windows and floral curtains. And in all these dreams, Julian was by her side, smiling, holding her hand. But not everything in Bellamonte was as sweet as the factory's chocolates. There were whispers in the corridors, scornful glances, especially from Victoria, a rich and arrogant young woman who harbored an old passion for Julian. She couldn't stand to see that high society young man captivated by a simple cleaner, and she wasn't willing to lose. But Josephine, at that moment, saw none of it. She was completely engrossed in the fantasy of sincere love. For her, Julian was different from others, and deep down, she believed her life was finally changing. That after so many years of being ignored and underestimated, someone saw value in her smile, in her presence. What Josephine didn't know is that sometimes love comes laden with illusions, and that behind a sweet kiss can hide the bitter taste of disappointment. Julian, sweet promises, broken hearts. With each passing day, Josephine found herself more and more captivated by Julian. The way he looked at her, how he laughed at her simple stories, how he complimented her dress designs. Everything in her believed he was the right man. A modern prince who, by some twist of fate, had noticed her, the factory cleaner. Julian had a tongue as smooth as silk. He spoke of feelings naturally, saying he hated the hypocrisy of Bellamonte's elite, that he felt suffocated amidst their games of appearance. With Josephine, he claimed, he could truly be himself. She listened, enchanted. For the first time, someone seemed to truly see her, not as an invisible employee or a simple girl, but as a woman, a whole woman. One rainy afternoon, he waited for her at the factory exit with a red umbrella. He said he couldn't bear the thought of her getting wet walking home. They walked together, and when they stopped in front of the humble house where Josephine lived with her grandmother, he held her hand for longer than necessary. His eyes sparkled. And then, out of nowhere, he kissed her. It was a calm, respectful kiss, yet full of silent promises. Josephine felt as if she had stepped into a romance novel. Her heart, which until then had beaten quietly, now danced in her chest like a child at a party. After that day, their meetings became more frequent. Julian brought hidden flowers, folded notes with silly verses, and even took her to a viewpoint on the outskirts of the city, where he promised, "One day, you'll be my wife, Josephine. I'll get you out of here, you'll see." These words were etched into her like fire on skin. They were more than promises of love. They were confirmation that her dream was taking shape. Josephine already envisioned herself designing her dresses in an atelier named Maison Josephine, with Julian by her side, handling the business, and a child running through the garden. But, like everything that seems too good to be true, there was a shadow behind the light. Julian didn't introduce her to anyone. He avoided walking with her in public. He said it was because of his aunt, who pressured him to date someone of his level, and that he was still trying to disentangle himself from an old commitment to Victoria. Josephine, despite her doubts, wanted to believe. Her innocent heart preferred to trust in love rather than face the harsh reality. Meanwhile, Victoria watched everything from afar and plotted in silence. She knew Julian was involved with the cleaner, and this poisoned her with jealousy. She refused to lose to someone without a proper upbringing, without a surname, without anything, as she scornfully put it. And she began to plant small lies, first to the factory colleagues, then to Julian's own aunt. The idea was simple: isolate Josephine and pressure Julian, and he wavered. He didn't have the courage to face his family. He didn't want to break up with Victoria scandalously. He preferred to keep things as they were, procrastinating, misleading Josephine with sweet words, even knowing it wouldn't last forever. Josephine, however, continued to believe, and more, she was giving herself, body and soul. At that time, she still didn't know that loving sometimes is like walking through a minefield of illusions. One false step, and the heart explodes into 1,000 pieces, and hers was about to explode. The shadow of Victoria, envy, and schemes. Victoria's presence in Bellamonte was almost as imposing as the Marshall chocolate factory itself. The daughter of a traditional and influential family, she possessed a cold beauty, a smile that rarely reached her eyes, and a silent ambition hidden behind her impeccable elegance. From a young age, she was accustomed to getting what she wanted, especially when it came to Julian, the young nephew of the factory's administrative director, her declared love and the object of her obsession. When Victoria learned of the involvement between Julian and Josephine, a humble young cleaner, her demeanor changed. Envy sprouted in her heart like a weed, spreading deep roots. For Victoria, this romance was an affront to her position, a threat to her influence and her relationship with Julian, and she was not willing to accept it. Victoria then began to weave her schemes with the precision of a strategist. Her first move was subtle, almost imperceptible to those who didn't pay attention to details. In the factory corridors, she spread whispers and loaded glances so that co-workers would start questioning Josephine's reputation. Is she really worthy of Julian? Why would he be interested in a simple cleaner? These questions, sown like seeds, grew rapidly, contaminating the environment. But Victoria wanted more. She knew that Josephine's weakness was her innocence and her faith in Julian's love. Therefore, she made a point of approaching people close to the couple, trying to create embarrassing situations that would make Josephine uncomfortable and insecure. At high society parties, she arranged casual encounters for Josephine to be seen in misinterpreted situations, fostering gossip and contempt. The young cleaner, in turn, felt the weight of rejection and prejudice, but still trusted Julian. She saw the twisted glances and heard the muffled laughter, but tried not to give them importance. After all, she believed that true love would overcome all barriers. However, what Josephine didn't realize was that Julian was becoming more and more distant, torn between family pressure and his own conflicting feelings. Meanwhile, Victoria continued her increasingly audacious maneuvers. She found out about Josephine's pregnancy and decided to use this information as a weapon to destabilize the young woman.
With the help of some influential allies in the city, she began to spread the news as if it were a scandal, painting Josephine as an irresponsible and manipulative woman, seeking only financial security at Julian's expense. This toxic atmosphere was undermining Josephine's confidence. Insecurity began to take over, and she started to question Julian's intentions. The sweet promises turned into silences and absences. She felt her heart ache, but hope still sustained her strength. Deep down, Victoria believed she was doing what was necessary to protect her right over Julian and the Marshall family fortune. She didn't see Josephine as a person, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. For her, victory was the only option. This growing tension created a heavy atmosphere in Bellamonte. The city, which once celebrated the sweetness of its factory, now found itself divided between sympathy for the humble Josephine and Victoria's relentless influence. Little did they all know that this plot of envy, manipulation, and pain would culminate in the fateful night that would forever change Josephine's destiny. The ball of shame, where dreams crumbled the city of Bellamonte, was buzzing with anticipation on the night of the grand annual ball. It was the most important social event of the year, an opportunity for high society to parade their finest attire and reaffirm their status. For Josephine, however, that night promised to be the decisive moment of her life, a chance to show that, even as a simple cleaner, she deserved respect and love. Dressed in a modest yet delicate gown she had helped her grandmother sew, Josephine arrived at the ballroom with a racing heart. Her eyes sparkled with hope and nervousness as she walked among the guests, trying to avoid suspicious glances and malicious whispers. Julian was there, waiting for her, and that made her feel brave. But Victoria, who wouldn't miss a chance to publicly humiliate Josephine, had already planned a perfect trap. From the beginning of the evening, she spread insinuations and rumors among the guests, creating an atmosphere of tension and disdain. When Josephine entered, the stairs began to weigh like stones, and muffled laughter echoed through the ballroom's corridors. At the height of the party, Victoria invited Josephine to dance, but what seemed like a kind gesture turned out to be a cruel trap. During the dance, Victoria made a sarcastic comment loud enough for all present to hear, insinuating that Josephine was pregnant by a man who was not her fiancé. The silence that followed was so heavy it could be felt in every corner of the room. All eyes turned to Josephine with disapproval and surprise. Some people began to whisper loudly, and others simply walked away, shocked by the news. Josephine felt her face burn, her legs falter, and the world collapse around her. The ball, which should have been her moment of triumph, turned into a public nightmare. Julian, embarrassed, tried to approach to defend her, but the pressure from his family and the guests kept him at bay. He was torn between the love he felt for Josephine and the fear of the social consequences of their relationship. Alone, humiliated, and heartbroken, Josephine left the ballroom amidst the cruel whispers of those present. In that moment, her dreams seemed to have been crushed, and the hope that had once shone so brightly began to fade. But even in the darkness of that night, a small flame of strength began to burn within her. Because sometimes, the greatest falls are the prelude to the greatest transformations. Pregnant and alone, the cruel discovery. After that night at the ball, Josephine's world seemed to completely crumble. The public humiliation, the muffled laughter, the disapproving stares, all of it weighed like an anchor in her chest. But there was something even deeper consuming her, the discovery that she was pregnant. In the silence of her simple room, illuminated only by the faint light of a candle, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she caressed the belly that was already beginning to hold this secret. The news came like an unexpected whirlwind, a mix of fear, hope, and despair intertwined within her. She knew the pregnancy would change everything. That in a small town like Bellamonte, the news would spread like wildfire, and many would judge her even before hearing her story. But above all, what tormented her most was the fear of facing it alone. Her relationship with Julian was far from solid. His sweet promises had turned into absences and silences, and she wasn't sure she could count on him. His family, especially Victoria, made it clear they wouldn't accept the pregnancy, particularly because they didn't know who the baby's true father was. Josephine felt the weight of loneliness like never before. Her grandmother, her safe harbor, tried to comfort her, but Josephine knew she couldn't completely alleviate that pain. The young cleaner felt invisible, rejected, and vulnerable in the face of an uncertain future. But despite everything, there was a flame of courage within her. The courage to fight for her child, to face whatever came, even without knowing how or when. She began to make silent plans, determined to protect the life growing within her, and to find a path to happiness, even if it meant doing so alone. During those dark days, Josephine also had an unexpected encounter that would change the course of her story. The arrival of Augustus Marshall, the eccentric owner of the chocolate factory, a powerful and enigmatic man who, for mysterious reasons, seemed willing to help her. Augustus saw beyond appearances. He wasn't a man of many public gestures,
but his gaze carried a rare kindness, a strength that inspired trust. When Josephine crossed his path, he perceived the pain and determination in this young woman whom many scorned. It was he who extended a hand when everyone else pushed her away, who offered refuge amidst the chaos. And, even without fully understanding the details of a life marked by disillusionment, Augustus made a proposal that would change everything. A marriage of convenience, a chance for Josephine to start over. But this decision wouldn't be easy. Bringing Augustus into her life meant entering a new world of responsibilities, secrets, and expectations. It meant leaving behind her innocence and embracing a new reality, where the fight for happiness would have a different, more bitter, more complex flavor. Josephine knew she couldn't turn back. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to move forward, for herself and for the child she carried. That was just the beginning of a journey that would change not only her life, but also that of all Bellamonte. Augustus Marshall, a knight in the storm. Augustus Marshall was a man who piqued curiosity in Bellamonte ever since he arrived. The owner of the region's largest chocolate factory, he was known for his reserved personality, his piercing gaze, and above all, his discreet generosity. Unlike the other wealthy residents of the city, Augustus didn't seek to flaunt his fortune. He preferred to act behind the scenes, quietly helping those in need.
When Augustus heard about young Josephine, a simple cleaner, pregnant and rejected by society, something in his heart stirred. Perhaps it was the memory of a difficult youth, or empathy for someone facing scorn and loneliness. He decided that this story needed a different ending. On a rainy morning, Augustus sought Josephine at her humble home. She was sitting on the porch, gazing at the deserted street, when he approached with an umbrella in one hand and an unexpected offer in the other. Without beating around the bush, he made her a proposal that would change both their destinies forever: to marry him, and in doing so, ensure protection for her and the baby. Josephine was stunned. Marry the eccentric factory owner? It was a distant, almost impossible dream. But it was also an opportunity to escape the humiliation, prejudice, and insecurity that surrounded her. After much thought, she decided to accept, not out of love, but out of necessity and hope. News of the marriage caused an uproar in Bellamonte. Whispers and speculation swept through the city. Many didn't understand why Augustus had chosen someone so humble and discredited. Some saw the gesture as an act of generosity, others as madness. But Augustus didn't care about others' opinions. He saw something in Josephine that no one else could. The wedding was simple, yet full of meaning. Josephine wore a white dress made by her grandmother, and Augustus was elegant, yet discreet. The ceremony took place in the small town chapel, with few guests, but full of emotion and hope. In the following months, Josephine discovered a new world alongside Augustus. Although it wasn't a marriage based on romantic love, there was respect, care, and an unexpected partnership. Augustus offered security, but also space for Josephine to grow and reinvent herself. Together, they began to plan the future. Josephine would continue to care for the child, whom they would name Daniel, and gradually she realized she could be more than just the factory cleaner. With Augustus's support, she began to learn about the business, manage small sectors of the factory, and prepare for a role she had never imagined holding. But not everything was simple. Bellamonte society remained suspicious, and some people made a point of reminding her of her humble origins. Furthermore, Victoria, her old rival, did not give up tormenting Josephine, trying to destabilize her new life at all costs. Even so,
Josephine felt she was growing, not just as the wife of a rich man, but as a strong woman, capable of facing any storm. Augustus, in turn, maintained his mystery. Few knew his true feelings, and he rarely spoke about his past. But one thing was certain: in that improbable marriage, there was a silent pact of protection and respect that sustained them both. This was the beginning of a new era for Josephine and for Bellamonte, an era where love could be born from the ashes of pain, and where a simple cleaner could become a force to be reckoned with. And destiny still held many surprises for this story that was only just beginning. Marriage of necessity, not love. Josephine never imagined her destiny would intertwine so deeply with Augustus Marshall, the powerful and reserved owner of Bellamonte's largest chocolate factory. The marriage proposal was a mix of hope and fear, an unexpected escape from the dark days the young woman was facing. It wasn't love that united them, but an urgent need for protection, security, and a minimally dignified future for the child she carried. On that clear morning before the ceremony, Josephine looked at herself in the mirror with a mix of anxiety and doubt. The simple dress, made by her grandmother, seemed small compared to the grandeur of the situation. More than the attire, what weighed heavily on the young woman's heart was the awareness that she was about to enter a new life, full of challenges and uncertainties. Augustus, in turn, was calm, almost impassive. For him, this marriage was a practical solution, a gesture of humanity, yes, but also a logical decision. He knew his fortune could be a force for good, and he couldn't allow a young woman like Josephine, who carried such pure hope within her, to be destroyed by others' cruelty. The ceremony was modest, but full of hidden meanings. Few guests, silent and attentive. The town whispered, speculated, but couldn't deny that this marriage represented something different. An act of courage, a breaking of paradigms. In the first few days after the wedding, Josephine felt like a stranger in this new world. Augustus's mansion was immense, full of luxurious details that contrasted with the simplicity of her former life. Each room seemed to tell stories of power and tradition, far from the humble routine she knew. Despite this, Augustus didn't treat her as someone inferior. On the contrary, he offered respect and care that, though distant, was constant. He understood that this marriage wasn't built on overwhelming passions, but on the need for protection and companionship. Josephine plunged headfirst into adapting. She wanted to prove she could be more than a wife of convenience. She studied the factory's business, learned from the employees, and began to make small but significant decisions. Each step was a silent victory against the fate that many had envisioned for her, but the weight of the past insisted on following her. Victoria, not satisfied with her defeat at the ball and the unexpected marriage, continued to weave her traps. Malicious whispers, scornful glances, and attempts to discredit Josephine multiplied. The rivalry that seemed dead was only dormant. Josephine, however, had changed. The pain of humiliation had been replaced by a new strength, fueled by the silent love she felt for her son and the determination to build a worthy future. Even without romantic love, she knew she could carve out her own space and, who knows, transform that marriage into something more genuine. Augustus observed everything carefully. He saw surprising courage in the young woman, and although he didn't show it easily, he felt a deep connection with her. Perhaps, in the midst of the storm they both faced, a different kind of love could emerge, calmer, more solid. The marriage of necessity paved the way for a new era in Josephine's life, where hope mingled with reality, and love began to rise from the ashes of pain. And as Bellamonte continued to watch, the true story was only just beginning to be written. A new life, away from the wounds. After her marriage to Augustus Marshall, Josephine felt as though she had been transported to another world, one filled with luxury, but also with invisible challenges. Bellamonte, with its narrow streets and constant whispers, seemed increasingly distant, almost like a painful memory she tried to bury. To escape the constant scrutiny of the town and the bitter memories, Augustus decided to take Josephine and the baby far away, to a place where they could start anew, far from the wounds of the past. They chose Argentina, a land of vast pampas and new possibilities, where the sun seemed to shine with the promise of a better future. Josephine, still feeling insecure, accepted the invitation. She knew that this temporary exile was an opportunity to breathe, to care for her son without fear of judgment, and to strengthen herself for what was to come. It was an important step toward reinventing herself.
In that new land, far from critical eyes, Josephine discovered a freedom she had never imagined. Without Bellamonte's social pressures, she could simply be herself, a mother, a woman, and, little by little, a woman who was beginning to see her own worth. The days were long and, at times, lonely, but Josephine felt strength growing within her. Amidst the Argentine plains, she walked with Daniel in her arms, feeling the unconditional love that only a mother can have. The little boy was her greatest treasure, the reason she faced every difficulty. Augustus, even far from the turmoil of their hometown, remained present. He managed his businesses from a distance, but never failed to send support and protection to Josephine. Although they still maintained a formal relationship, there was a silent complicity between them, a respect that strengthened them mutually. Josephine also began to study, interested in learning about administration, so that one day she could help Augustus at the factory. It was a dream that grew slowly but steadily. She wanted to prove, first to herself, that she could be more than a wife of convenience, that she could be a strong, independent woman. Meanwhile, Bellamonte continued its routine, but Josephine's absence was already beginning to be felt. Her story, marked by pain and triumph, was discussed in the factory corridors and in the town's homes. Some felt pity, others envy, but few imagined what was truly happening far away. The distance also allowed Josephine to heal from her emotional wounds. The public humiliation, the betrayals, and the prejudices still echoed in her memory, but they lost their power in the face of the new life she was building for herself and her son. She learned to trust again, first in herself, then in the people around her. The strength she found in that exile wasn't just for survival, but for transforming her story. And as Josephine grew stronger, destiny was setting the stage for great plot twists. The past, though distant, had not been forgotten. Hidden secrets would begin to emerge, and the promise of an unexpected inheritance would cast a shadow over Bellamonte, forever changing the young cleaner's life. But for now, the young mother enjoyed her moment of peace, nurturing her dreams and preparing for what came next. The farewell and the secret in the will. Months flew by, and although the new life in a foreign land brought peace and renewal to Josephine, fate had its own plans. Augustus Marshall, the respected businessman, began to show signs of weariness, not just from the responsibilities he carried, but from a hidden ailment that slowly sapped his strength. When news of Augustus's failing health reached Josephine, she felt a mixture of fear and sadness. Although their marriage had begun as a practical agreement, a necessary partnership, over time, a silent respect, an unexpected connection had grown between them. Josephine knew Augustus was a generous-hearted man, and the possibility of losing him was a pain she wasn't yet ready to face. Augustus, aware of what was approaching, made a decision that surprised everyone when the news broke. He drafted a will that left his entire vast fortune to Josephine, the young cleaner who, against all expectations, had become his wife.
The meticulously written document revealed not only a gesture of kindness, but also a symbol of trust and recognition for Josephine's strong spirit. For many in Bellamonte, this news was a shock. After all, who was this humble woman who suddenly became the sole heir to one of the region's greatest fortunes? The news spread like wildfire, dividing opinions and rekindling old tensions. Victoria and other members of the Marshall family could not accept Augustus's decision and began to question the will's validity, seeking legal loopholes to contest the inheritance. Josephine, in turn, received the news with mixed emotions. The relief of finally having financial support mingled with the weight of responsibility. She knew the journey didn't end there, that she would now face legal and social battles to protect what had been entrusted to her. But there was an even bigger secret hidden between the lines of the will. A secret Augustus decided to keep until the very last moment. The child Josephine was carrying, Daniel, was not his. This revelation, which could shake the entire structure of the inheritance, remained a mystery that would only be revealed when the time was right. This silence created a palpable tension. Josephine found herself at a crossroads: accept the fortune without revealing the secret, or face the consequences of the truth, which could destabilize everything she was beginning to build.
Meanwhile, Bellamonte buzzed with speculation. The news of the inheritance going to the pregnant cleaner became a headline, a topic in conversations, and a reason for suspicious glances. The city that once rejected her now had to contend with the fact that Josephine, the discredited young woman, was at the center of immense power. At the same time, Josephine felt the weight of loneliness and responsibility. With Daniel in her arms, she knew she needed to be strong, not only to face external battles, but to care for the son who represented the hope of a different future. Augustus, in his final days, remained close, offering words of comfort and encouragement. His farewell was silent, marked by a pact of protection and trust between him and Josephine. When Augustus finally passed away, leaving behind an inheritance no one expected, Josephine found herself alone, but no longer defenseless. The young cleaner who faced humiliation, prejudice, and pain now held the destiny of Bellamonte's greatest fortune in her hands. And amidst this storm, the secret about Daniel remained, waiting for the right moment to come to light. A secret that would forever change relationships, hearts, and the future of that city. The announcement that rocked Bellamonte, the inheritance and the secret. The day the news reached Bellamonte was like a slow-motion explosion. First a whisper in the factory corridors, then a murmur on the street corners, until it became a headline in the local newspapers. Augustus Marshall leaves his entire fortune to his young wife, Josephine. And it didn't stop there. The young widow, in addition to inheriting control of the largest chocolate factory in the region, was a former cleaner, and even more scandalous in the eyes of the local elite, was pregnant. Pregnant. But the child wasn't Augustus's. This last piece of information was the spark that ignited conversations in drawing rooms, cafes, and gatherings of respectable ladies. How could the magnate leave everything to a woman carrying a child that wasn't his? What kind of bond united those two? And who, after all, was the true father of that child? While the city seethed with theories and judgments, Josephine remained silent. She knew that every word she spoke would be twisted, that any weakness would be used against her. She decided that, for now, it was best to protect herself and little Daniel, now a healthy, smiling newborn, completely oblivious to the chaos his birth had caused. In the Marshall mansion, the atmosphere was different. The will had been officially read in the presence of lawyers, and Josephine, with a mix of astonishment and gratitude, discovered the true extent of the responsibility falling on her shoulders. The factory, the shares, the properties, the investments, everything was now under her guardianship. And along with the inheritance came the suspicious glances, the unwanted visits, the advice from those who had never cared about her before, including Victoria. Victoria couldn't hold back. Days after the official announcement, she appeared at the mansion, impeccable as always, with a forced smile on her lips
and venom in her words. "Congratulations on your achievement, Josephine. Who would have thought, huh? From scrubbing floors to running a factory?" she said, pausing with a sharp gaze. "Now, all that's left is to prove that this child of yours is truly worthy of all this." Josephine, now stronger than Victoria could ever imagine, stood tall, her eyes firm, and replied with the calm of someone who had walked through hell and returned. "Daniel doesn't need to prove anything. He has his mother's love, and that's more than many people in this city will ever have." The response spread almost as fast as the news of the inheritance, and with it, a new image of Josephine began to emerge, that of the woman who, though judged, did not bow down, that of the mother who fought with dignity, that of the widow who would not be manipulated. Still, the question lingered. Whose child was it? Was Julian the father? A past unresolved romance? Or someone Josephine was secretly hiding? The city wanted answers, and Josephine knew that sooner or later she would have to face that truth head-on. But she also knew that before the revelation, she needed to grow even stronger. Take control of the factory, face those who wished to see her fail, protect Daniel, and above all, heal her own wounds, which still bled in silence. The city of Bellamonte would never be the same, and Josephine was about to return with a strength no one would be able to ignore. End of Part 1.